Welcome to Truth Report. I'm Alex Truth, and tonight we are pulling back the curtain on a region being reshaped by bombs, backroom deals, and brazen hypocrisy. The Middle East is on fire, and the people stoking those flames are the same ones claiming to negotiate peace. We have 5 stories tonight, and when you see them laid side by side, the pattern is unmistakable. This is not random chaos. This is strategy. Stay with us.
I'm Maya Clarity, and let's start where the world's attention supposedly is, the US-Iran ceasefire talks. Al Jazeera is reporting deep divisions between Washington and Tehran, even as a 2-week ceasefire is technically in effect. But here's what you need to understand, a ceasefire that nobody expects to hold is not diplomacy. It's a timeout. The question is who benefits from the appearance of negotiation while the machinery of war keeps grinding forward behind closed doors.
Let's talk sticking points. The US side is walking into these talks with a maximalist position, demanding Iran dismantle significant portions of its nuclear enrichment program, curb its ballistic missile development, and effectively sever its relationships with allied militias across the region. That is not a negotiation. That is a list of surrender terms dressed up in diplomatic language. No sovereign nation accepts the wholesale dismantling of its defense architecture as a precondition for peace.
And on the Iranian side, their demands are entirely predictable and, frankly, reasonable by any standard of international law. They want sanctions relief, sanctions that have strangled their economy, denied medicine to civilians, and isolated them from the global financial system for years. They want security guarantees that the United States will not simply bomb them the moment talks conclude. Given recent history, that is not paranoia. That is pattern recognition.
Here's what the mainstream coverage skips entirely. These talks are not happening in a vacuum. They're happening while US and Israeli military operations against Iran are ongoing. You don't negotiate peace with someone while simultaneously hitting their infrastructure. That's coercion. The ceasefire is a stage prop. It gives Washington the ability to say, "We tried diplomacy," when the next escalation comes. And it will come, because neither side has been given a genuine off-ramp.
The 2-week ceasefire window is also strategically useful for military repositioning. Both sides know this. American carrier groups don't stop moving because diplomats are talking in a conference room. Iranian air defenses don't power down. The ceasefire creates a fog of legitimacy around continued preparation for the next phase. And the media plays along, reporting on progress and sticking points as if this were a genuine negotiation between equals. It is not. It never has been.
Now let's connect this directly to our second story, because while the world watches these so-called peace talks, the United States and Israel have been systematically targeting Iranian universities. Let that sink in. Universities. Middle East Eye reports that academic institutions have become explicit targets of US-Israeli military operations. This is not collateral damage. These are deliberate strikes on centers of knowledge and education.
The justification, as always, is the claim of dual-use research, that Iranian universities are conducting nuclear weapons research or developing military technology under the cover of academic programs. But let's interrogate that claim. The International Atomic Energy Agency has had inspectors in Iran. If there were credible evidence of weapons programs operating out of university labs, that evidence would be presented at the UN Security Council. Instead, what we see are unilateral strikes based on intelligence assessments that are never made public. We've seen this playbook before.
Remember Iraq. Remember the weapons of mass destruction that did not exist. The intelligence community told us Saddam Hussein had active weapons programs, and that justification was used to destroy a nation. Now the same framework, unverified intelligence claims about dual-use facilities, is being used to bomb Iranian universities. The parallels are not subtle. They are screaming at us. And the cost is measured in destroyed laboratories, shattered research programs, and dead academics who were studying physics, not building warheads.
What gets destroyed when you bomb a university? You destroy decades of accumulated knowledge infrastructure. You destroy research into medicine, agriculture, engineering, fields that benefit civilian populations. You destroy the next generation of Iranian scientists and scholars. This is not about preventing weapons proliferation. This is about enforcing technological dependency. A nation that cannot educate its own engineers and physicists is a nation that cannot be self-sufficient. That is the strategic objective. Keep them dependent. Keep them weak.
And let's name the international law violations explicitly. Protocol I of the Geneva Conventions provides protections for civilian objects, including educational institutions, unless they are being used for military purposes. The burden of proof is on the attacker. You cannot bomb a university on suspicion. You need concrete evidence of military use, and proportionality in your response. Flattening a campus because one lab allegedly had dual-use equipment is not proportional by any legal standard. These are war crimes being committed in broad daylight.
The silence from Western academic institutions is deafening. Where are the statements from Harvard, Oxford, MIT? When Russian forces damaged Ukrainian universities, there was immediate and righteous condemnation from the global academic community. But when U.S. allied forces systematically dismantle Iranian academic infrastructure, the response is silence. That selective outrage tells you everything about whose knowledge is valued and whose is expendable in the current world order.
Now let's pivot to a fascinating development: Vladimir Putin inserting himself into the frame as a potential peace mediator. Middle East Eye reports that Putin told Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian in a phone call that Russia stands ready to help mediate between Iran and the United States. On the surface, this looks like standard diplomatic posturing. But dig deeper, and Putin's move is a calculated chess play with multiple objectives.
First, understand Putin's position. Russia has been entangled in its own conflict in Ukraine for over 4 years now. The Russian economy is under severe sanctions pressure. Putin needs diplomatic wins, and positioning Russia as a peacemaker in the Middle East serves that narrative domestically and internationally. If Russia can broker even a partial agreement between Washington and Tehran, it undermines the Western narrative that Moscow is nothing more than a rogue aggressor state. Its reputation laundering through mediation.
Second, Russia has deep strategic ties with Iran. They cooperate on energy, on military technology, and increasingly on circumventing Western sanctions through alternative financial networks. Putin is not a neutral party here, he is Iran's ally. But that's precisely what makes his offer interesting. Sometimes the most effective mediator is not the neutral party but the one who has enough leverage with one side to actually deliver concessions. The question is whether Washington would ever accept a Russian-mediated framework, and the answer, under current political conditions, is almost certainly no.
Which brings us to the real purpose of the offer. Putin knows Washington will reject Russian mediation. That rejection itself becomes a propaganda tool. It allows Moscow and Tehran to jointly argue that the United States is not interested in genuine peace, only in dictating terms. Every rejected olive branch, even a cynical one, shifts the narrative. And in the information war that runs parallel to every military conflict, narrative control is a weapon as potent as any missile system.
There's a deeper geopolitical restructuring happening here that most coverage ignores entirely. The traditional US-dominated unipolar order is fracturing. Russia, China, and Iran are building alternative institutional frameworks, BRICS expansion, bilateral currency agreements, joint military exercises. Putin's mediation offer is part of that project. It signals to the global South that there are alternatives to American-led diplomacy. Whether or not the mediation happens, the offer itself reshapes how nations calculate their allegiances.
Now to a story that signals a dramatic escalation in the regional conflict. Hezbollah has claimed responsibility for a drone attack targeting an Israeli military vehicle in the occupied West Bank. Let me emphasize, the occupied West Bank, not southern Lebanon, not the Golan Heights. Hezbollah is now projecting force deep into Palestinian territory. This is a strategic red line being crossed, and the implications are enormous for the trajectory of this conflict.
Historically, Hezbollah's military operations have been concentrated along the Lebanese-Israeli border and, to a lesser extent, in support of the Syrian government. Operations inside the West Bank represent a fundamental expansion of Hezbollah's operational doctrine. They are signaling that the resistance axis considers the entire occupation, not just the Lebanese border, to be within its scope of operations. This transforms Hezbollah from a border defense force into a regional military actor with reach and ambition that Israel's security establishment has long feared.
The use of drone technology is the critical detail here. Drones are cheap, difficult to intercept, and devastatingly effective against ground vehicles. Hezbollah has been steadily building its drone capability with Iranian technical assistance, and this attack demonstrates that those capabilities have matured to the point where they can execute precision strikes well beyond their traditional theater of operations. Israeli Iron Dome and David Sling systems were designed to intercept rockets and missiles. Low-flying drones operating in the West Bank represent an entirely different threat profile.
Now consider the political dimension. The West Bank is already a pressure cooker. Israeli settler violence is at historic highs. The Palestinian Authority is losing legitimacy by the day. And now Hezbollah is conducting military operations inside that space. This puts Israel in an impossible position: respond with force against Hezbollah in Lebanon and risk a full-scale northern war, or absorb the hits and watch their deterrence credibility erode in real time. There is no clean option, and Hezbollah knows it.
What mainstream media won't tell you is how this connects to the ceasefire talks we discussed earlier. Iran's network of allied forces, Hezbollah, various Iraqi militias, the Houthis, operate as a distributed deterrence system. Every drone strike in the West Bank, every Houthi attack on Red Sea shipping, every militia rocket from Iraq sends the same message to Washington: you cannot isolate Iran without dealing with the entire network. That is enormous leverage at the negotiating table, and it is leverage that cannot be bombed away.
The timing is not coincidental. While diplomats discuss sticking points in ceasefire talks, Hezbollah demonstrates operational capability in the West Bank. This is coordinated pressure, the military track and the diplomatic track running in parallel. Iran negotiates with one hand and projects force with the other. To be clear, the United States does exactly the same thing. The difference is that when Washington does it, the media calls it negotiating from a position of strength. When Iran does it, the media calls it terrorism. The double standard is the point.
Our final story tonight takes us from the battlefield to the crackdown on dissent in Western democracies. Tucker Carlson, and I want to be precise here because this is an unusual alignment, has publicly slammed the United Kingdom's decision to ban Palestine Action, calling Prime Minister Keir Starmer enslaved. Palestine Action is a direct action group that has targeted factories and facilities in the UK involved in manufacturing components for Israeli weapons systems. The UK government has now designated them as a proscribed organization.
Let's separate the messenger from the message for a moment, because Carlson is a deeply polarizing figure with his own agenda. But on the factual substance, the UK has banned an organization whose primary activities involve disrupting the supply chain of weapons being used in what the International Court of Justice has determined may constitute genocide. Let that framing settle. A Western democracy has criminalized protest against weapons manufacturers whose products are being used in potential genocide. That is the reality beneath the headlines.
Palestine Action's tactics were confrontational. They occupied factory rooftops, blockaded entrances, damaged property at Elbit Systems facilities and other defense contractors with direct ties to the Israeli military. These are not polite letter-writing campaigns. But the question every citizen in a democracy should ask is this: when legal channels fail, when your government continues to license arms exports despite mounting civilian casualties, what forms of protest remain legitimate? The UK government's answer is apparently none.
The proscription of Palestine Action puts them in the same legal category as ISIS, Al-Qaeda, and the National Front. Think about that equivalence. A group of activists who threw paint on weapons factories is now legally equivalent to organizations that have committed mass murder. This is not about public safety. This is about protecting the arms industry from accountability. Elbit Systems and BAE Systems are major employers and political donors in the UK. Follow the money, and the ban makes perfect sense.
Carlson's use of the word enslaved to describe Starmer is inflammatory, but it points to something real. The UK's foreign policy on Israel-Palestine has been remarkably resistant to public opinion. Polls consistently show that a majority of British citizens support Palestinian rights and oppose unconditional arms sales to Israel. Yet the policy persists across Labour and Conservative governments alike. When Democratic leaders consistently act against the expressed will of their constituents on a specific issue, the question of who they actually serve becomes legitimate.
And here's the broader pattern that connects all 5 of our stories tonight. We are watching the construction of a world where war is permanent, dissent is criminal, and knowledge itself is a military target. The US negotiates with Iran while bombing its universities. Russia offers peace while waging its own war. Hezbollah expands operations while ceasefire talks continue. And Western governments ban the very organizations trying to stop weapons from reaching conflict zones. Every single one of these stories points in the same direction: the consolidation of power by those who profit from permanent conflict.
The arms industry is the thread that connects all of it. Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, BAE Systems, Elbit, their stock prices rise with every escalation. The ceasefire talks that go nowhere? That's sustained demand. The university bombings? That's eliminating future competitors in the defense technology space. Hezbollah's drone capability? That justifies the next generation of billion-dollar interceptor systems. The banning of Palestine Action? That's removing the only people who were physically disrupting the production line. It's a closed loop, and human beings are the raw material being fed into it.
Let me be direct with you tonight. The information you receive from mainstream outlets is not designed to help you understand the world. It is designed to manage your reaction to it. When CNN reports on ceasefire, sticking points, they are not explaining the power dynamics, they are normalizing a process designed to fail. When the BBC covers the Palestine action ban, they frame it as a security measure, not as the criminalization of anti-war activism. The framing is the weapon. The facts are secondary to how they are packaged for your consumption.
And this is why shows like Truth Report exist. Not because we have access to secret information, every story we covered tonight came from publicly available reporting by Al Jazeera and Middle East Eye. The difference is that we connect the dots. We ask who benefits. We follow the money. We refuse to treat each story as an isolated incident when the pattern is obvious. 5 stories, 1 system, a system that wages war, suppresses dissent, destroys knowledge, and calls it peace and security.
So what do you do with this? First, diversify your information sources. If your news diet is exclusively Western corporate media, you are getting a curated version of reality. Read Al Jazeera. Read Middle East Eye. Read The Intercept. Read journalists from the regions being bombed. Second, support organizations that are doing the work, legal defense funds for activists, independent journalism outlets, academic freedom organizations fighting for scholars under siege. Third, talk to people. Break the isolation that makes this system possible.
And most importantly, refuse to be numbed. That is the real weapon, not the drones, not the sanctions, not the bans. It's the slow erosion of your capacity to care. Every story we covered tonight involves real human beings, Iranian students whose laboratories are rubble, Palestinian families living under occupation and drone strikes, British activists now facing terrorism charges for opposing arms sales. These are not abstractions. These are people, and they need you to stay awake, stay angry, and stay engaged. This is Maya Clarity.
And I'm Alex Truth. We don't report the news they want you to hear. We report the news you need to hear. Share this episode. Challenge the narrative. And we'll see you next time on Truth Report. Stay vigilant.